everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This episode is very important for emerging economy, especially for Bangladesh, India, and definitely it will be very helpful for developed nations as well. We will discuss on mangrove forest. We have our world famous speakers, Mr. Dan, Mr. David Smith, and Dr. Tamanna. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Dan, what you want to discuss about mangrove, how does it works, or what's the strategy we can implement to grow this mangrove?
Yes, another great topic. Our coastlines are interesting because most of the human population of Earth lives within 100 miles of the coastline. But if you talk about wetlands and mangroves, most people are not that well informed. In fact, they might even not know what a mangrove is. But it's a kind of coastal ecosystem plant that can anchor itself in very loose soil and can grow high above the changing tide line, and it has just some amazing benefits. It absorbs wave energy. It acts as a breeding ground for most tropical fish. It is, something that is taken for granted, really. And it kind of calls up the question of what is natural and what is exotic. In nature restoration, there's the idea of native plants and the idea of invasive or exotic plants. And there's a big movement to keep an ecosystem kind of frozen with native plants. You'll have these habitat restoration efforts where they will say, "Oh, this plant is native. This plant's not native. Let's tear out all the non-native stuff." Obviously, mangroves are long established native plants, but ecosystems do evolve. They do change. So it's kind of a debate among conservationists as to, are we supposed to freeze an ecosystem at a certain year and say everything that's here when this year is good and everything that comes in outside of that time frame is bad. Anyway, that's kind of a side debate. But yeah, mangroves are great. They're kind of like the equivalent of kelp, because kelp is another coastal plant that can be grown with great both human benefit and ecosystem benefit. But of course, mangroves have to be grown where it doesn't freeze, or in mostly the equatorial and tropical regions. And it's kind of interesting because I'm part of a X Prize carbon sequestration team, and our strategy is to build an equatorial belt of seasteads that would do things like mangroves and kelp and different plants that sequester carbon. By the way, mangroves sequester carbon on the gigaton scale, which is the name of the X Prize, is the carbon giga prize, because your solution has to work at the gigaton, giga meaning billion, the billions of tons level of sequestering atmospheric carbon. And indeed, the prize is divided into land-based solutions, atmospheric-based solutions, and oceanic-based solutions. So I actually got to work on a wetlands restoration project a few years back at the naval base up the coast from me at Port Hueneme. A gal from UCLA designed a study. There were some abandoned sludge ponds, which were basically used for storing the solid component of human waste. It was about a 1,000-acre site, and we basically graded it and let down the breakwater and let the ocean flow in. And it was amazing. The next day, there was a sandpiper running along the new beach. There was a little bit of seagrass sprouting up. Nature is just amazing, how she can heal herself from human intervention. So that was a very satisfying wetland restoration project to have been a part of. It took several months, and it was a pretty big project involving a lot of earth moving. Fortunately, mangroves don't require heavy equipment to restore mangroves. It's something that can be done with human scale labor, and it is being done in lots of parts of the world. In fact, your part of the world, Dr. Sharif, Southeast Asia, I think, has about 30% of the mangrove ecosystem. So it's a great potential for healing nature and creating jobs and collaboration. So it's a great topic today. You're doing you an educational service by having a topic like this. So I really applaud you.
Yeah.
And thanks.
And hopefully everyone will be happy that we are closely working with this mangrove projects. Our plan to develop this mangrove in Bangladesh, in India, and transfer it in developed nations as well. So David Smith, what you want to discuss about mangrove?
Well, Sharif, thank you again for letting me be part of your program today. Now, in the prior issue we did on mangroves, it was very interesting with some of the feedback we got from people online as well. But as Dan has said, mangroves are very, very important in the ecosystem we see. It's important for, as Dan highlighted some, for the climate change. It's a very important part of the ecosystem too, of creating jobs and opportunities. It's an important part for maintaining the balance of the aqua uh, ecosystem with the fish and the birds and others with that as well. You know, mangoes are really grown in blackish water, which is coastal salt water, and uh, and they're really interesting in that they are part of the filtration system that you see around the coastlines. They have a filtration through their root system to cope with salt water and wave action, but then they also have adapted to very low oxygen conditions in the muds and things of them. And they're mainly between uh, the latitudes 25 degrees north and 25 degrees south. So they're right in the middle. And uh, they also have high solar radiation requirements to filter the salt water through their roots. And it is there. And it really is also part of the way of preserving coastlines. Their root system is such that they trap sediment and things and prevent erosion. For and confirmed here today is there's over 80 different species of these mangrove trees. And you're right, many of them can be, and most of them have to be planted with human intervention as opposed to machines because of the where they are found and the soil conditions where they're found. And very much so that way. They also, what we've seen, for example, in Florida recently with some of the storms, they act as a shield against storms. They help save property, they help save lives, they help protect the ecosystem as well. And they really are a
Might have got some internet issue there with David. I'm not seeing him. I think he was going to say they really
I
are
think in that situation,
a
Dr.
buffer.
Tamanna,
Should I speak? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my personal concern is that, most of the population are not much aware about the mangroves in the world currently, and especially in countries like India and Bangladesh and Nepal, where we have the whole setup in a certain way. And mangroves do something which is very beneficial for the ecosystem. For example, they maintain a healthy marine life as well as coastal economic system by providing essential habitat for thousands of species. So, you know, w- not just for humans, but also for plants, for below sea life. They are an amazing system. The mangroves can do for that. So uh, now the future of environment is inextricably linked with mangroves. So for example, it leads to economic restoration, sorry, ecosystem restoration. Then it manages chemicals and waste. So they have the power, the natural power, the nature's power to deal with chemicals, for example. And worsening impacts of health and mental health, social justice, migration, oil and gas. All of these things are the ones which are done in a way that mangroves are able to help humans in a big way. So the intricate root system of mangroves also stabilizes shorelines. So shorelines are the ones which are also protected, preventing erosion and protecting the land from waves and storms. So just it's just not about protection of humans, but also they are able to save from tsunamis, etc., the storms, etc. And mangroves also act as carbon sinks, you know and effectively storing and sequencing carbon. So carbon is another pollutant which is able to they are able to deal with, and which helps to moderate climate change. So climate change, because of the carbon which it is able to absorb, the climate change is being helped by that particular aspect. So worldwide mangrove reduces risk to more than 15 million people and prevent more than 65 billion in property damages. So that's like amazing. And I guess mangroves should be protected in a very big way. And the developed countries where it is not there, they should cultivate a system where mangroves are there. And I mean, I'm talking about developing world because we are facing the brunt of pollution and systematic climate changes. And so is the world, but the all the pollutants from the developed world are being faced by India, are South Asian countries, as well as the Southeast Asian countries. So I guess that needs to be done. And so from preventing coastal flooding to filtering water, mangroves help the planet in numerous ways. Now, under threat from tourism, agriculture, and more, here is how to protect them. Worldwide, mangroves reduce risk to more than 15 million people and prevent more than 65 billion property damages. Very few flora can claim to be as important as to the overall health of our planet as mangroves are. So it is so much important for our health. I mean, we need to involve scientists, agriculturalists, as well as the populace, the people who are living near seas and the mangroves. They have to be actively pursued, and they should be involved in bringing about changes in the system, and bringing about an evolved sense of being one with the nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I request Mr. David Smith.
Well, Sharif, sorry, I didn't know I
Mr. David.
dropped. Sharif, sorry, I didn't know where I dropped on the other one, but mangoes have just a tremendous impact on the ecosystem, and from preserving coastline to preserving the ecosystems to really helping serve as a interface between the saltwater environment, the terrestrial environment, the crops, the breeding grounds for many birds and fish, uh, and the way they filter salt and pollution. And mangroves are just really important as you get there. Uh, Also, if you begin to look at the concentrations, they're distributed globally in that tropical region. The highest concentration, as Dan said, is in Asia, but they're distributed globally. Down here in Texas, we have along our coastline, but particularly our south coastline and going into Mexico, and they serve a tremendous function there. We saw with the hurricanes that recently went up off the coast of Florida, some of the impacted mangroves there with preventing some of the erosion that happens during things like hurricanes and tropical storms. Uh, and so those are some of the other types of usages there. Uh, Mangroves are fantastic carbon sinks for pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and have that role in sustainability as well. But I think one of the biggest roles is how it functions in the ecosystem of providing a place for fish to breed, for turtles to breed, for birds and other things to be able to breed and extend the habitat. So this is really part of looking at an ecosystem that works uh, in a tremendous way of doing different things, and it is a multi-dimensional use that I see that is there. And the really the what we need to do is understand what are the elements required for mangroves to uh, survive. Dan was saying that most of them are planted by humans. That's correct. The environment of the blackish water and the deep mud, which is where mangroves typically grow, would be really difficult to do with traditional machines to plant them. But they are a very, very important part of what we see going. And the tree, particularly in Asia, which is the highest concentration, uh, they have tremendously helped diversify the ecosystem there as well as what we've talking about, their impact on the environment, on sustainability, uh, taking salt out of the blackish waters, and just so many different functions. So, Sharif, let me stop right there.
Dr. Martley.
Hey, glad to join y'all. I don't know as much about mangrove trees. I did have a question for both Dan and David and Dr. Tammany. I think I pronounced that correctly and all along those lines. But as I was looking up stuff on the mangrove trees, they kind of reminded me of what folks in the African society used to call the baobab tree or the tree of life and all along those lines. So I was wondering if there were some similarities in that way, if anybody had any ideas, because these do seem to be trees that are grown in areas that are not as fertile as usually thought of, and that are grown in areas that are not thought of as the usual areas for farm life and vegetation and all along those lines. So, like I said, that was just a parallel that I was wondering if it existed or if I was imagining things. So, if anybody had any ideas around that, I would love to hear their thoughts around that.
Well, I've got some thoughts about how to make the restoration kind of more economically palatable to the world economies, because coastline is such valuable real estate. The first impulse for a developer, let's say, is like, oh, what are all these ugly branchy looking trees? Let's rip all this out. And then of course the next big wave action that comes along, or even the gradual erosion that the beaches are eroding like crazy here in Southern California. In fact, we could probably I noticed we have 100% mangrove loss from what we used to have in Southern California. So That would be a really. I mean, I could picture like a mangrove forest integrated with a coastal marina. I mean, it looks kind of cool if you could have marinas interspersed with mangrove forests. I don't know if that's been looked at by developers, but I mean, they are serving a public good. They're what's called an externality in economics. It's something that isn't calculated in the value proposition for most economic equations. So when you have these kind of things, you have to share that expense and share the resultant benefits. So I think it'd be a great discussion to talk about how to economically empower the restoration of the mangrove resource.
I imagine it's not just an issue in California because I know here in North Carolina, where I'm based at, there's been constant conversation going on for the last decade or two around one of our famous lighthouses because there is always the belief that that lighthouse will eventually go set sail off into the ocean because of its proximity to the ocean and because of some of those storms and other things that you've been talking about. But yeah, Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is a world famous lighthouse, and there's always been concern anytime that there is a storm that could be its beginning of its demise because definitely of the erosion and other things that happen even here in North Carolina as well. But definitely it is a very popular lighthouse that folks go and visit on a regular basis.
Maybe we'll have the Cape Hatteras mangrove forests pretty soon.
Could be. It could be a solution possibly.
That'd be a tourist
I
attraction.
like that one.
Yeah.
That would be a start. Yeah, it's pretty far north. Maybe it's too far north
Yeah,
for that.
It's above 25.
Yeah. But you could do
It's about what, David?
25-degree latitude is kind of the critical range for the
Critical
Yeah.
range.
Most of them are between 25 degrees latitude north and south. So right in the tropical zone.
But there's other wetlands kinds of plants that can buffer wave erosion too, so.
David, the Amazon's in that general area. So have they been doing a lot of work around mangroves in the Amazon area?
Yeah, in the north side of the Amazon. The south side of the Amazon is actually at the other borderline, and it's a totally different ecosystem in that part. And it's actually kind of neat. I have visited the Amazon probably 5 or 6 times during some of my trips in Brazil and some of the work in Brazil, and it's one of the more unique ecosystems. And it's kind of like the other one is when I have been in Thailand, I love going through their backwater things there with their really weird boats they have there to do it, where the propeller comes out the back on about a 20-foot long shaft to keep you there without being involved with the underwater growth. But all of those are examples of different water-based ecosystems that are important for commerce, that are important for sustainability of the wildlife and of the land, and for soil quality and water quality. And so while mangrove forests are important, these entire wet water ecosystems, wherever they are important as well.
What is the ecosystem like in those mangrove forests? I don't know if you or the good doctor have any idea, but I know my dad is an avid turtle collector and has actually got several live turtles. And I know that he's been around the world definitely enjoying turtles and all along those lines. But I definitely know friends of mine that are into the bird space and a number of other spaces as well. So I was just wondering what is the ecosystem of
They're big
mangrove?
ecosystem
respected
holders
scholar
for
respected
turtles.
scholars, I personally feel that we should explain to the people who are watching us what actually mangroves are. Like, I mean, we are talking about water, we are talking about trees, etc., but probably they would not understand what they really are. I guess there's the shrubs or plants which are like growing along the coastlines. So I mean, if all of you could speak on that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was alluding to, Doctor, because I was trying to get more of the feel of what a mangrove is. Because, like I said, my background is in journalism, so I really have no idea what a mangrove is either. So that's why I was asking the question that I was asking, so that I could get a better understanding. Also, because this is not my lane, that is more David and Dan's lane, and that is what I said at the beginning. But I do have a journalism background, so yeah, David and Dan, if you want to explain to the listener audience and even myself exactly what a mangrove is, because I imagine that a lot of the students and a lot of the others that are watching are like myself and the good doctor are trying to figure out exactly what it is and why it is beneficial to our society.
Probably if you've seen a movie like The African Queen, you've seen a lot of mangroves. That's that story where they're going down that slow African river. But uh, there's
Dan, that's why I mentioned the baobab tribe, because when I looked up mangroves, it kind of reminded me of the baobab trees, which is that tree of life and all along those lines. So that's why I was trying to figure out if there was some association between the two, because
yeah.
that is based in Africa.
Imagine a tree on stilts where the roots are the stilts, and you'll get a mental picture of a mangrove. But they like to grow at the delta, the mouths of rivers in the tropics, and that's actually where a lot of the pollution is also being discharged into the ocean. So I would like to see perhaps mangrove restoration coupled with capturing that pollution before it gets into the river or into the ocean from the rivers. I think there's like
Actually, I guess mangroves are shrubs or small trees with that grow along coastlines and in backwash water that is part of salt and fresh water. In
Mhm.
fact, these trees have adopted to grow in low oxygen soil, where salt water intrudes several times a day, and where slow moving water introduces fine sediments and particularly particulates, as far as NOAA has described it. So this is what is basically what mangroves are.
Appreciate that, because as you were making that saltwater parallel, I know that friends of mine that are into fishing will know of the difference between the saltwater and the freshwater. So it sounds like the mangroves are definitely involved in that conversation as well. So yeah, we get an understanding even in that conversation around saltwater and freshwater. That probably can be a good parallel. And I see that it looks like maybe either David or Dan have brought up a graphic. So yeah, if they want to go through that
Or
graphic and maybe even
yeah,
make the parallel
Mark,
to
I brought up the graphic.
thanks. And yeah, if you just kind of go through that graphic and maybe even bring up some of those things around fresh and seawater, because I do know that whether you are a fish person that has a fish in your house or not, a lot of people will be able to understand that context, including the layman and everything.
So let me start with this one then to answer your question. This is really where the distribution of the mangrove species are. And you can see how in Asia and around India and that area, and how there's just many, many, many different species there. You come over back into North America uh, and Northern Africa, you see there's fewer species. But you can see where their concentration is. So their concentration is below where you were talking about earlier, Bart, with some interesting exceptions. I mean, you go down and look at South Africa and around Australia, New Zealand, they are at the extreme of the zone for them. And it's probably different species that are more adapted for the cooler water there, but they're very important with those ecosystems. But going back into this, uh, they really are in tropical and subtropical regions there. And you can see how their root system spreads out dramatically and creates an interlocking grid. Uh, in some of the mangrove forests I've been, it's really hard to get through there with their roots as you see them. And the roots, like this dictates, are above the water as well as under the water. We may create this one, and you can see some of the ecosystem around it where, like we were talking about earlier, it helps with the birds. You see on the right hand side where it talks about helping with the coastal protection. Uh, and you can see with the graphics on the differences, uh, how much of an impact they made where they've been damaged and taken out of places. Uh, they also go and capture their leaves and things into the soil uh, to become nutriments to the water, and then that helps grow other species of plants and fish and birds and things. One of the places I've spent some time around some of the mango forest here is catching crabs. I love fresh crabs, and it's a great habitat for that because of all the other animals and shrimp and things it uh, collects. But it's just a wonderful ecosystem, and you can just see with this very simple graphic out of National Geographic
Yeah, no,
how
definitely
it
see that.
begins to work.
Yeah,
And
just
for
really
some size context, they can go from 6 meters to 20 meters, but they're averaging around 6 meters, 20 to 80 feet in that range
Hey,
for the red
Dave
fang.
and Dan, just out of curiosity, because one of the things that crossed my mind just as a question as y'all were talking is have the because I know even in like Latin America and places, the Incan societies oftentimes had a better understanding of their own environment than some of the people that came into those environments. So you mentioned that a lot of this is in Australia. So I was wondering if the Aborigines had a better understanding of the mangroves than say some other people might do in that area, because I do know that even in Latin America and Peru, that the whole irrigation system was kind of developed by the Incas and all along those lines. So I was wondering if there has been some things that we can learn from those that have dealt with this system longer than maybe some of the folks that have moved into the area have. And I was thinking about the Aborigines in Australia and some of the Aborigines in New Zealand as well. And like I said, I don't know people in that culture or that many people in that culture. So I was just wondering, as y'all are better world travelers, if y'all have seen them doing a better job of preserving this culture and if there are things that we can learn from them in our own society.
Well, I think it's a great ecotourism, possibility. People would probably love to paddle a kayak through a mangrove forest, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's always better to let the indigenous people, because they do naturally do permaculture, really permanent agriculture. They know just to take enough to keep it so there's enough to grow back. I mean, that's kind of a hallmark of indigenous peoples is they don't over extract from the ecosystem. So that's good to preserve that knowledge and those languages too that are being lost all the time. So yeah, I'll vote for indigenous ecosystem knowledge preservation if that answers speaks to that question there, Mark.
Doctor, you're on mute. Doctor, you're on mute.
Sri Lanka has a lot of coral life. I mean, if anybody has visited there, and because they live where land and sea connect. So Sri Lanka is a place where this is majorly seen, and India too. I mean, where Lakshadweep and Daman and Diu, islands are there. So this is the whole thing, and in fact, it's like uh, protecting mangroves can prevent an estimated 50 billion in annual damages to the US economy as well. So the US itself is I mean, the economy from hurricanes, tropical storms, winds, and flooding. So this is what US too faces, and if mangroves are grown there, I guess this particular aspect would be reduced to a definite level, and more than 50 billion would be saved.
Yeah. The economic impact on it is quite large as you look at. Sharif, can you bring the slides back up a minute?
Sorry.
Dr. Sharif, can you bring the graphics back up a minute? I guess not. I went ahead, Mark, for you, I added to the PowerPoint slideshow a couple more images showing the actual trees themselves.
Okay.
So that you can see.
There you go.
Let me see. Let me go down here. So here you see this particular grove is off the Florida coast
Yeah.
on the Gulf side. and you can see how the roots really are interconnected there, and you can see some of the heights, like what Dan was talking about. This one is just a more close-up view of looking at how the roots really get intertwined, create barriers. You can see how it'd be a great place for small fish and other things to eat and hide. And they take the salt out of the blackish water and replenish it. Uh, they trap there all of the leaves and other things which decay and produce nutriments there. So just again, just beginning to see some of the differences of how they work and how they are used, you can see how an ecosystem like this is very beneficial to many different things on the coastal environment.
Yeah, was that actually in the Everglades? Because I'm imagining that that looked like the Everglades, but I wasn't sure if that was in the
Yeah,
Everglades
this one was on the Gulf side of
Gulf.
the Everglades.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's a really neat concept, and there's so many different species of this, and then yet they all are uh, serve a very similar purpose, and they adapt to their unique ecosystems, which I think is a wonderful activity.
Oh yeah.
And I know, Tamana was mentioning that statistic about $50 billion being saved in property damage if we had these coastal buffers, and that's just a first order effect. I mean, there are second and third order effects of just having that ecosystem integrity that you can't actually put a price on yet. So that's just food for thought. That
No, food for thought. For both you and David and the good doctor, is it possible to? Because I hear y'all talking about these uh, degree dimensions and where they are in terms of the equator and all along those lines. But is it possible to bring these to areas that are not in that region that you are describing, Dave, and everything? Because I'm thinking about like even New York got hit by Sandy a long time ago, and definitely along those lines, we know New Orleans got hit, and I don't know that New Orleans is in that line that you are talking about. So, is it possible to bring these trees and these elements outside of their natural environment in order to protect areas that are not in that zone that you are talking about? Like, could you bring it to
Well,
Texas or
Louisiana does have mangrove
okay?
along parts of the coast. The problem you have is when you talked about New Orleans, and in New Orleans, the development, the human impact on it has caused the loss of this type of mangrove forest.
Right.
And I mean, you can't really mangroves along a beach is not a good touristy beach.
Mhm.
You don't have a sandy beach to go swimming. You cannot really build around them because of how invasive they are. So you see it more in less populated areas than in highly populated areas. But no, this would do a good job of helping prevent erosion. It would do a good job of being that barrier. Uh, where you saw many of the mangroves, particularly when I look up and down since I live in this part of the world, not in Asia, and I look up and down the coast around Mexico in that area, there's mostly in limited population areas, and they serve as a great barrier. You've heard about barrier islands, barrier reefs. Uh, Mangrove forests are a barrier approach as well.
Interesting.
And
And
there are proposals for doing artificial barrier islands
Yeah,
to prevent those kind of damages that we saw, like from Hurricane Sandy. But go ahead.
yeah. That's what I
I
was
mean,
wondering. Go ahead, good doctor.
like as far as mangroves are concerned, like they can protect marine habitats from a lot of harmful nutrients. Now, as far as Indian history is concerned, one of our gods, Lord Hanuman, as he's called, and he's considered to be a god of health and many other things, but right now we are concentrating on that particular aspect. So when Lord Ram and Lord Lakshman, they went for war with the demon, the Lord Lakshman fell ill. So he went inside this river as well as outside, and got a lot of pharmaceuticals for, the medicines for him. So I guess, from these mangroves we could also have a lot of nutrients which are healthy for humans. So I guess it's in our history, and it can be developed even now. Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Hey, Dave and the doctor, as well as Dan and everything. I was just wondering, because one thing I was thinking about is I had the pleasure recently of talking to somebody from Florida, and they were doing some Everglades research actually with snakes. And I was just wondering how much are the predators in that area? Because I'm imagining that with it being so secluded, that might be the other issue in terms of humans that's going there. Is because I imagine there are a number of predators there, whether that is snakes, whether that is alligators, crocodiles, or a number of other predator type creatures. So how much are the predators there in the mangrove element? Because I'm imagining there's quite a few of them, but I don't know that for a fact. Anybody?
Yeah, David, when you were in the Amazon, did you find the mosquitoes were pretty intolerable, or were there alligator or crocodile threats?
No,
What was?
it's more the lizards and things, the alligators. And yes, there were a lot of bugs. Their bugs were not like our mosquitoes, at least here in Texas. Um, but the humidity there was just something that really surprised me.
Hmm.
Is that it was hard for me to walk a long ways just because of the humidity. And even though in my brain, I still think I'm in my 20s, I'm not. Uh, and it's the environment is tough. Same with mangroves forest. Is if you think about how it traps everything in those roots exposed and things, it's a difficult area to get around in as well.
Hold on a second. Wait a minute, Dave. You mean you're not 20 and the good doctor is not 18? Because I thought the good doctor was 18 and you were 20. I'm very much shocked because I thought that y'all were smart and we're at these different ages and everything. So you mean that you're
Mark,
not 20 and the
Mark,
good doctor is not
you
18?
you're only as old as you feel and with what you decide to do. In fact, I think you would like what we've done in my houses and with my friends. We have forbidden the word old. We can be older, but we cannot be old. So, yes, you're right.
Yeah, because I was just convinced that you were 20, the good doctor was 18, and Dan's only 19. So stop trying to fool me. Y'all are all teenagers, so stop trying to fool me. Right,
Well,
good doctor, you're only 18. You've got all this knowledge at 18. Go ahead and admit it.
so, Mark, I have to tell you this. I'm actually spending the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this weekend at the ACL Music Festival, along with 100,000 other people and about 40 bands each day. So, things like that keep you young.
Yeah, they definitely keep you young. I like to be at a music festival myself on Saturday. So there's a music
Speaking
festival.
of age, I want to point out that there's something out there called the Dublin Longevity Declaration, which I have signed, and it's a lot of scientists and public people are signing it, and it's a declaring our war on aging. You know that aging shouldn't be inevitable. So
No,
anyway, you're going to talk about age. I want to mention some
no, you
age-related
just mentioned
breaking
that and
news.
everything. Just really quickly, because Dr. Sharif does have this lovely global network and this lovely global show, and all in that space. So that being said, are our government leaders paying enough attention to the mangrove forest, or are they giving enough conversation around this and everything? So I guess I'll start with the good doctor since he's over there, I believe, in the India area. But we seeing enough research in this on a government level, whether in the West or in the East and everything? So any thoughts around that as to whether we're seeing enough support from the government in research in this area?
Well, I'd like to speak to the value of the groups like the Nature Conservancy. You just
Right.
buy up land and put it out of development. Leave it wild. Buy up land and leave it wild. I just want to put that as my 2 cents on that topic.
No, I'm a big fan of nature conservancies. We actually have one here, the Triangle Nature Conservancy here in North Carolina, and I think it was associated with our tiger rescue. So it's actually a tiger rescue area here as well. So there, and actually And also here is a lemur center. So I know the lemurs are actually native to Asia, but there is a very major one connected to Duke University. So yeah, I'm a big fan of nature conservation as well.
And you don't need the government to do that, by the way. You can do that
Because I think the
independent of the
Lemur
government.
Center might be affiliated with Duke University, or might even be independent. And I want to say the Nature Conservancy is totally independent.
But government does have a role to play.
Yeah.
I don't want to,
Right.
but yeah. What do you think, Dr. Tamana? Is government playing a big enough role in conservation in your part of the world?
Yes, because India is a welfare state, and it's mentioned in our fundamental rights preamble as well as directive principles of state policies. The government, because the most of the population is poor, and very few. We have a large middle class evolving now, but there's a lot of difference between the rich and the poor in India. So the government has to intervene. It's not like developed world where people themselves will go and do I mean invest in research, etc. The government has to interfere in research, in pharmaceuticals, in science, in technology, in space, everywhere. Though we have companies in space, for example, where they are investing money. The big rich corporates are investing money, but ultimately it is the government which is the one which is looking after all these things. So we have to resort our whole structure on government. We have to have them think about as far as marines are concerned, or mangroves are concerned, or Silicon Valley is concerned. And so these all things, everything, for example, is under the government. And India being a federal polity, we have states which have been delegated the work, and below the states are the panchayati raj systems, so the villages which will look after it. So the government can, with collaboration of all this structure, bring about changes in the country in a big way.
Yeah, I would say that wealth inequality doesn't benefit the wealthy or the poor. It's bad for both. So it's in everyone's interest to reduce this incredible disparity between the rich and the
Yes.
poor, which is getting worse, I guess.
Yes.
But maybe mangrove forests will be a key leverage point in that inequality reduction. It's too bad that ecotourism is not going to be friendly to a high humidity environment, David. Sounds like no one wants to go where it's really humid to be
That's right.
a tourist, I guess, so much.
Are there any leading research institutions in either
Thank you.
the West or the East that are doing research on mangroves? Is there anybody that is leading in this forefront and everything? And if so, who are they? And is this an area that others can be looking at? Because I know here in North Carolina, where I'm at, we of course got the major universities that everybody knows, like Duke and UNC, University of North Carolina. But we also have HBCUs like North Carolina Central and Shaw and St. Aug and a number of other colleges, including a women's college, Meredith, and all in that space. So I was just wondering.
Yeah,
Is,
one is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration,
okay.
NOAA.
And I would put it in a good word. I mean, a lot of people think that the defense industry, the defense complex, does a lot of pollution, but they are also very proactive sometimes in cleaning up their messes. I know they have a mandate to go with biodiesel, 80% biodiesel for all of their diesel-fueled equipment in the U.S. Department of Defense, and they are very proactive in cleaning up groundwater spills. I've worked on a lot of those projects. So you got to give due where it's due to the Department of Defense when they do good things instead of polluting things.
They don't always do bad things. Sometimes they do some very positive things that you sometimes can
Thank you.
institute some research as well. Because I know that my cousin has been doing some work, and I know this is a
Okay.
different topic, but he has retired from the military and is now working on warp technology. So he's now working with a company that is developing warp speed and all along those lines. So yeah, definitely the military can have some good things that they do both while they're in the military as well as being sort of the impetus for some of their post-military careers.
Mhm. Thank you. We have to go for the closing remarks. Mr. David Smith, what are the closing remarks for today? Concluding remarks for today,
Well, Dr. Sharif,
Mr. David.
thank you again for having me be part of this. And I guess congratulations on your 1,001st broadcast today. Uh, and you always pick fantastic topics on this. You know, going just back to the mango ecosystem, it's vitally important. We're seeing threats from land being converted for other purposes, for mining, for agricultural purposes. We're seeing chemical pesticides and fertilizers and oil spills having an impact on them. Uh, we're seeing other big threats from to mangroves from human pollution. Things like plastic bags are a really big threat to mangrove forests. And uh, National Geographic actually came back and said that in the last 20 years, more than half of the world's forests have been cleared or destroyed. So it's time for some action to be taken on them. And again, they're important for food, for carbon, for green stability, for coastal protection, water purification, and for helping the fish, birds, and other wildlife be successful. Um, and more needs to be done. More needs to be done to cover them and recognize it. So, Sharif, like so many of the topics on your show, education is going to be important for the future of this. Uh, we need to inform people beginning in elementary school as part of that process the importance of this so that children can actually help teach their parents and that children know it from an early age. It's the next generations that are going to be important for helping survive through this type of sustainability challenge. So, Sharif, again, thank you for letting me be part of your show.
Well, I guess I could go next, Donner.
Well, I was going to say I'll go next unless you want to go
Oh,
next, Dan.
oh,
So
you can go
I'll,
ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
okay. No, I was just going to say, because as y'all were talking, David, I was just thinking that definitely these conversations around sustainability and definitely land sustainability, including the mangrove trees and all along those lines, is very important. I was actually thinking about a fearful notion and everything because I know a lot of people are getting involved in technology, and I am definitely a proponent of technology and a supporter of technology. But I hope that we don't get to the point that we are destroying these very natural habitats that are very wonderful and are very key to our natural survival. And all along those lines, and in the process, that we are only going to have the only mangrove tree that we would be seeing in the near future would be one like we saw today when David did that display, or seeing it in the metaverse. So I'm hoping it will actually have the case where we actually are able to have these developments actually in real life so that we can actually enjoy the benefits of them, because they sound like they are very much important to not just the protection of the coastal line, but the protection just of society in general and all along those kind of spaces. So that would be kind of my final thoughts. And once again, Sharif, I also congratulate you on your 1,001st episode. So it's amazing that you've got this. And for now, we can have you go for 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, and 10,000, and all along those lines. But you've got past the first 1,000, as this is a 1,001. So I'm going to toss it over to either Dan or Doctor as well. But definitely, I do think that it is something we need to be researching. And I think that, as I think David alluded to, we've got to make sure that it is taught in the school system, but also that the media pays attention to these conversations as well, because definitely that is something that we don't see enough of, is coverage in mainstream media of some of these very important scientific conversations. So I'll turn it over to either Dan or the good doctor, depending on who wants to speak next.
I guess I'll jump in. Uh, Great to be part of the 1,001st show. The first 1,000 is easy, right? That's the second 1,000. No, it gets easier with the second 1,000. But yeah, we make the mistake, I think, of thinking ourselves apart from nature when we are actually so bound up with nature. We are made of non-human cells in the main. We have 100 trillion cells. About 90% of them don't have human DNA. Our tears and our sweat has the same salinity as the oceans. We're kind of like poetic parts of the ocean that are able to walk around and communicate and experience self-consciousness. And we need these kind of overview effects to see ourselves as part of nature and not apart from it, to save it. Because if you don't consider yourself as a continuous part of the living biosphere, you're probably not going to have the right consciousness to take care of it, to steward it. And we should be choosing life in every decision we make. And something as unfamiliar as a mangrove forest that doesn't get talked about can be crucial to choosing life. Right now there's someone in the Philippines probably hacking down a mangrove tree to make charcoal, because that's the easiest way for him to cook his food or get light in his shelter. But we're not going to save the biosphere unless we make everyone a stakeholder in it and give everyone stewardship privileges in it. So that's what we all need to think about. And I really want to put in a good word for space economy and space development being the 18th of the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's how we can track things like mangrove forests, is with space remote sensing and satellite imagery and all the other benefits that being curious and pushing back frontiers can bring to humankind. So I'll pass the microphone on that note.
Thank you, Dr. Taman.
Yes. I personally feel that because of new diseases which are developing in the world right now, and new pandemics which we are witnessing, and diseases which are still incurable right now, we need to harness our potential, whether through seas or through the space. We have to have resources. We have to have sources where these things like these can be explored, resources can be explored, chemicals can be explored, where diseases can be lessened, and human uh, health and capacities is developed in a big way. And I guess till the time we do not emphasize on, because now we are seeing, China, for example, going for lunar. India has been to Mars, again, lunar, sun, etc., etc. So we would definitely, as Dan is also saying, space is a major place where we need to explore ourselves, and also mangroves and the sea, where it's unlimited potential is there. And so I mean, the kind of diseases, cancer, AIDS, these diseases, we need to kind of understand that, if we have resources, we have chemicals which are dealing with this. So we might have to do away with English medicine, for example, and develop more authentic, uh, uh, in India we call it Ayurvedic, in Urdu we call it what is that? Uh, yeah, whatever. But yeah, I mean, so both of them, many of the countries have their indigenous medicines. So, and if we kind of collaborate them with space and sea, I guess we will be able to successful in dealing with many of these diseases. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's sessions. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.